use my phone to read this quote because I want to make sure I get the author and the wording right on this. But my quote is, many of life's failures are people who did not realize how close they were to success when they gave up, which is a Thomas Edison quote. And this quote
Yeah.
to me is huge because there's so many times where there's setback, and even in the recent like week and a half of my life, a lot of factors and some things I'm working on. I have a graphic novel, things had changed kind of behind the scenes, and just to be able to say, okay, I just need a week to rethink this. And it's all coming together beautifully because it was like, nope, no, don't quit. It just means try again in a different way and pivot. And so I think it's an important quote to remember that, like, when you want to give up, just don't. Just go a little further.
So welcome to this week's episode of Leadership Soundbites with my very special guest, Marcy. Marcy, I didn't even ask how to freaking pronounce your last name. Say it, please. Bursac. Thank you. I realized I've never said this word out loud.
It's okay. I get Bursac sometimes. Like, it's there. It's fine. The idea is
No,
there.
no, it's not. No, I have an unusual name. I think when you and I first met and we were doing
Yeah.
an intro call, you talked about people called you Mary.
Yes, because they forget
And
this.
you're like,
Get
even
used
though
to
it's,
it.
yeah, even though it's Marcy, but it's like, let's not start off that way. I mean, it may weave itself in at some point, but let's start off good, at least with the right
But no
intention.
shame. No shame on mistaking. It's okay. Humanity is humanity.
Yeah, well, yeah, we're well-intentioned humans. We're
Yes.
well-intentioned. So I want to, I love, because you and I were chatting and I'm like, okay, how do I introduce you? Who are you? Because I freaking love what you do, the energy you bring, the diversity of what you do. And so what I'm about to say doesn't even include part of the stuff that isn't really it's probably your passion work, but not as passionate as the other. So 2025 Missouri Mother of the Year. How freaking cool. Okay. And I'm
Super
not
neat. And
surprised.
by the founders of the Mother's Day holiday, American Mothers Association. Super cool, right?
I love that. I'm just so excited. Founder of the Forgotten Adoption Center, another area that I love. And there's the work that you're doing in that space and the work that you're doing in that space with kids so that they don't feel excluded, they feel included and special. And I love that too.
Yeah, but
Four-time
it's forgotten
author.
adoption option. Just so people don't start Googling the center.
Yeah,
I don't have a building. There's no building.
no. Marcy's a virtual world, but you're doing work in this space. Four-time author, adoptive mom of two. And I love that that was your plan A, and we'll talk about that. America's foster care adoption mentor. Awesome resource, by the way. So reach out to Marcy. I'll put contact information in the description. We haven't even started talking yet. I'm just describing you. And you've been on with all the stuff that you're doing, you've obviously gotten the attention of other people in the world that can connect with purpose of what you're doing. So you've been on Kelly Clarkson's show, Canva, Roku, Love What Matters, KMOV, and more. So KMOV is a local station to where you're,
It is in the
yeah,
St.
doing
Louis
that.
market. Yeah, they've
Okay.
been really great partners. Yep.
Yeah, I love that. Welcome to the conversation. And I know you have a
Thrilled
quote
to
to
be
kick us off, and then we can unpack some of this stuff. I'm going to say one thing before you kick off with a quote, and it's just, I think, an example of who you are. The energy that you bring to the room is insane, insane in the best insane way. And you're always, without looking, you're always looking for ways to help. And the example came when you and I were chatting before we got on, right? I'm like, oh my God, I just got back from Atlanta last night at midnight. I'm literally booked back to back. I keep meaning to put buffers on my calendar so I can put, and you're like, just block off an hour, Michelle, just do it. And then you can go do this thing. And I'm sharing this because every human listening can do this thing. All right. So literally real time, I went on and I'm like, Monday, I'm going to do this because Calendly, the calendar that's booking all this stuff, has that functionality. So I want to thank you because you're always scanning for what does better look like to make better for us humans through this life that we're living. So thank you for that, man.
Well, and the
Welcome
weight
to the
of like,
conversation.
isn't that great? Well, and it's you're so welcome because to me, like the weight of that cognitive load of it's still parked in that mental parking lot that we all have. And
Yes.
I know mine has like I don't like having all the spaces filled. Like I think there's 5 spaces that I limit myself to, but just taking that 2 minutes because I'm like, is anyone really going to care if it's 5 less minutes of podcast? Like, who cares? Like, you can get that thing pushed aside on the calendar and moving on. I'm actually going to use my phone to read this quote because I want to make sure I get the author and the wording right on this. But my quote is, many of life's failures are people who did not realize how close they were to success when they gave up, which is a Thomas Edison quote. And this quote
Yeah.
to me is huge because there's so many times where there's setback, and even in the recent like week and a half of my life, a lot of factors and some things I'm working on. I have a graphic novel, things had changed kind of behind the scenes, and just to be able to say, okay, I just need a week to rethink this. And it's all coming together beautifully because it was like, nope, no, don't quit. It just means try again in a different way and pivot.
Mhm.
And so I think it's an important quote to remember that like when you want to give up, just don't. Just go a little further.
Well, and thank you for that. And I was going to ask for an example, right, of when that is in your life. And obviously you've given a recent one. I think what you call out is there's a lot of times in life, and I know I've done it guilty in the past, and I coach myself all the time, is that this block, this barrier, this whatever is in the way isn't the end. It just means it's the opportunity to go, okay, what am I missing here? What do I need to rework on? And because it's just we're not quite there. And so it just may be a fraction of an adjustment over here to go, now you're off and running. Because what I've found in the past, and I'm sure I'll continue to experience in the future, when I get these barriers, these roadblocks, it just means that's not the way that you should be going right now.
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
so we just need to look around and go, okay, so where is that open door? Where's the open door of the path I should be going? And you can feel it when you're off and trucking on that way.
Yeah, but it can feel insurmountable. I know yesterday morning I was on a morning run, and I hit this hill towards it. It wasn't super steep, but it was a hill, and you had to be like, okay, we're not on flat ground. And it was
No.
interesting because I was processing through one of the common sayings when we hit hard things or when we have to stand up for something is that the hill you'll die on. And that's been
Yes.
singing in my head for the past week. And I don't actually like it because I'm like, what does die mean in that story? And like, what is that? To what end does that mean I'm willing to go? And as I'm running, there was this moment where it kind of crystallized for me that it was like, actually, this is not my hill to die on. This is my summit to climb. And I was approaching that hill and I thought,
Mhm.
okay, well, let's embody what I'm feeling in this. And it was, well, when you climb a summit, like it does get steeper. And so, as a runner, you start going on your toes. Like there's a different form you have to use. And I got really excited because I thought, that I don't need to look backwards and say that was a really hard time. Instead, I can look back and say that's when I pressed in. That's when I like consciously shifted what I was doing. And I have no idea how long this hill actually is because usually, the hill like plummets, so it's like I probably have a few more summits in front of me. And that's good. Like it's such a good thing.
Oh, growth.
Yeah.
It's so funny when you said the words, right? Because is that the hill to die on? Is that the hill to die on? Are you going to freaking dig in and fight for this thing, whatever this thing is? And it could be the way, the whatever it is. But when you shifted the language to where this is a summit to climb, or however language you used, the energy I felt shifted because
Okay.
all of a sudden, to your point, when you go on your tiptoes, you're leaning forward, right? So there's just more in there. You're not as solid on the stuff and leaning back, especially in a hill, because you need to try and get yourself to where you're level or leaning in and not falling back. But it's those minor adjustments that you make, and then the energy shifts when we get the right language. And
Yes.
I was talking to the other day that was putting together leadership development summit for 60 to 125 people. It was staged over the levels of leaders that were going to come together. And it was talking about was he goes, we really need to get really clear on expectations of leadership. And I'm like, okay, I'm fine with that. I mean, it's like clarity is super important with leadership teams. And he goes, so he and his peers had designed this and was framing it as prescriptive leadership. I said, so can we talk about that word? He goes, yeah, because I'm not loving it. And I said, great. So he was feeling it too,
Yeah.
right? And so we talked about stuff. And so I threw out another one. I said, because what sounds to me, what you're describing is effective leadership, right? Is
Mm.
it's working, we're making a difference, we're engaging. And so what does that mean to be an effective leader? What are you going to see and hear? How are people going to feel, right? So we went down a different path and he goes, Michelle, I've got to work on this. I'm just not good at it. And I said, I'm going to challenge you on that right now. I said, because 2 months ago when we first started coaching, would that word have even triggered for you? Prescriptive. And he thought for a minute and he said, I don't think so. And I said, exactly. I said, so listen to your body and your gut, because those words, right? Like the hill to die on, the way it landed for you, those are
Yeah,
the things that tell you this isn't the right thing. This is heavy. And so we
right.
went through that practice. I said, say prescriptive leadership, just feel heavier light. He goes, really heavy. I said, what about effective leadership? He goes, light. And I said, exactly. You have it in you. You're already have an awareness of the better way and what to let go of. But I think that happens to us all the time. And then we tell ourselves a different story, but pay attention to the clues like you did.
Mhm. And so much of that, though, I think in one sense, though, I'm like, I'm glad I at least had some frame point to put it on. Cause it's like, I didn't know what to call it. But then even as you're talking through, like, pay attention to your body, it's like to run up a hill. I don't like running hills, but
Oh,
like there's a very different breathing that you got to do to like suck it up buttercup style. And at the same time, there's a mindset of climbing. Like it's different than like, I'm just trotting along and I'm here on a
yeah,
workout and I actually don't, your body's fighting you if you don't want to work out. But when you
yeah.
push into the gear of that incline, your brain's really like, it's okay, sister, to just stop. Like there's a bit more of a fight there that you have to push through.
It's so funny you're saying that. I'm laughing inside too, because all the thing about running and all that stuff that you're saying, I'm going to go when you're walking up a hill and because I'm
Yes,
not a runner, right?
sure.
But I can 100% relate because when I go walking my neighborhood, there's like a 2.7 mile loop that I'll do. There are hills.
Yeah.
And so when I get to the hill, I notice it and I have to kick in. And my thing to myself is I'm maintaining the same pace. So
Hmm.
if I'm maintaining the same pace, there's a different level of energy and intent and focus that wasn't there before. So I'm listening to a podcast or I'm listening to whatever as I'm out there, and all of a sudden I don't hear the podcast because I am focused on getting up at that top at the same pace. And so there's a different level of focus, and I'm not even freaking running, I'm walking.
I mean, just those, it's not what you had that was easy. It was a different gear. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
yeah, we want to quit. Our bodies fight against us for those things.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about, or a lot about, um, your I wouldn't even say second role or job. I mean, you're like you're in a few different worlds that you live in. Can you share that just at a high level and then talk about the one that just I mean, it's infused. I think your day job doesn't infuse your personal life, okay? But this other role that you play in what you've done is personal.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it's interesting. I feel like I've kind of found this ecosystem that I didn't know existed. So I started in the nonprofit world and spent 12 years doing philanthropy leadership. So I was doing fundraising and event planning and all that good stuff. And then adopted my children by choice to the foster care system. They're biological siblings, and quickly realized I never set mom goals, but putting them to bed over the phone at evening while I was going to a meeting with adults that had day jobs, that really wasn't in my top five. So
Mhm.
there really wasn't a way out of that cycle and that rhythm. And so I couldn't change jobs in the sector. Everything else wanted more time and more demand of travel. And so I pivoted and I learned to code. So I'm one of those people that was like, okay, technology has a lot of opportunity in it. And so fast forward, I'm working in tech, and during the pandemic, when the United States sent stimulus payments out to kind of help with the economy, my husband and I were both employed, and we were like, do what do we do with this? Because like we
Yeah.
didn't feel like we had dire need. And so
Yeah.
I had seen some news article about someone that donated their stimulus payment and just ran that idea by him. And I had no idea what I'd do with it, but I just want to know, could
Yeah.
we entertain that?
Yeah.
And after I got his yes, the next day I was like, okay, what I want to do is write a book about. So we had adopted our children by choice, and in the foster care system in the United States, it's not a straight line. I don't even know that it's a predictable zigzag. Like it's very much like 4 steps forward, 62 steps back. Like everything feels like you constantly have no idea what's next, and you're kind of in like an elastic rubber band, kind of being tossed in it as the family. And just to clarify for your listeners, in the United States, so we do need foster parents, people to
Hmm.
temporarily care for children who might have experienced abuse, neglect, loss, trauma,
Hmm.
for a temporary amount of time. And we call those people foster parents. I was not a foster parent. There's
Right.
another track, which is not as easy to get into for various reasons. And that is I adopted children by choice through foster care. And today
Right.
there's 108,000 children who are legally available across the US to be adopted that are just kind of in a foster home somewhere and very likely to be one of the 23,000 children annually that age out on their 18th birthday. So that's kind of the backdrop. So as my husband and I are going through this process, it gets long because it does. And I had started a blog. It got a lot of attention. And the blog was really just the perspective of me as an adoptive parent. It had nothing to do with why my kids were in care. It had nothing to do with here's the trash talk on their biofamily.
Yeah.
Hear
Yeah.
that? No, we don't do that. And it just people started seeing the kids that we became aware of too, in terms of there's this whole group of kids.
Yeah.
So all of that said, Michelle, as a backdrop, um, I started a nonprofit by writing the conversations. I had been sharing 2 hours in my living room teaching other families to do this. And because of
Yeah.
the pandemic, and I couldn't do that anymore because you couldn't come to my home anymore, we
Yeah.
had friends move to Michigan who had this wonderful idea that I should teach out of state via Zoom. And they were like, I'm sure it can't be that different. And it's not. Like there's a little bit of
Yeah.
different timelines or different,
Yeah.
lingo, but it's the same process. And so today, that involves more resources. I've got 3 books, a podcast, an app. I have a reading program in grades K through 5. I'm in the middle of the graphic novel I'm referencing will come out November 2026. November is National Adoption Month. That will then take the reading
Oh, I love
program
it.
into middle school and high schools with a more teen relevant story about what it's like to be a youth in foster care. I have a research study that's in the middle of being published. But this is like my side thing. I don't take any pay from doing this. I have a day job in tech that I thought I was going to have to choose one or the other. And the way I was led and a lot of prayer was, yes, like go do those. And what I've ended up with is an employer that gives me 80 hours to volunteer a year, and a heck of a lot of flexibility. Like right now, I've stepped away from my lunch hour and here we are
Yeah.
together, and I'll still go back to my paying job after this. And so what I really do is I coach families around the country on how do you decide if this is the right process for you? You do have choice. If you want to adopt, you might want to adopt a baby. Do not go through foster care. They're not going to be underage too.
Yeah.
You might want to adopt internationally, but you also might want to adopt through foster care. And like I said, it's not a straight line. So I'm creating resources in this space, and I coach families during my lunch hour while my kids are at martial arts on how to navigate it. And I'm excited to tell you, Michelle, um, that just in the past week, a family that had reached out. So typically, the data shows about 5 years it takes to think about this and then to adopt, and that's about how long it took me. But
5 years?
it's a lifetime decision, Michelle. It's a lifetime decision. Okay, you got to think about, especially if you're in a pair of a relationship. It's not just one person.
Yeah.
One person, you have a lot of family dynamics, and you got to get opinion from people, and some of that can pull you back because they're afraid, or there's just stuff out there that's
Oh,
stigma.
yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so it can set you back. So if you're in the 2-person relationship, you then have to both get on the same page. Are we really emotionally ready? And a lot of times,
Mhm.
one of us has some childhood wounds. In my situation, it was me. And so I
Right.
enroll in therapy. So you really got to work on self and get to a good
Oh,
spot.
I gotcha.
And then on top of it, you're going, is this the right time? Are we ready? Are we living? And you don't have to have a mortgage. You can be renting a place, but there's just, some getting ready in that space. So I say all that because I had a couple that reached out December of 2023.
Right.
And I had known one of the people in the relationship through a master's program I went through. And they're in Vermont, and they had just gotten enrolled. We'd been keeping up over social media and had just a host of questions related to stigma and related to worry and related to unknowns, right? And a lot of this is
Mhm.
just parenting in general. Like when you birth a child, and I had the same worry where you're like, well, what if they this? And you just don't know, because there's not like a special path that you get the kid that only makes good choices in life. Like that's just not how it
Yeah.
goes. And yes,
Yeah.
you can see my sweet little dog who's joining us.
Oh, cute. He's like, okay, I want to be a part of this conversation.
Want to be part of it. And so they reached out December of 2023, and then I got a message last week on Friday, and they said, hey, we've gotten licensed and we've interviewed for siblings ages 7 and 8, and we've been picked. And we want to make
Wow.
sure we understand our yes and our no. Can we talk again? I'm like, of course you can, because we have very candid conversations where you can
Yeah.
literally ask anything, because that's how you should have a mentor in this space, right?
Exactly.
So Michelle, we have a wonderful conversation, just getting it all out there on Friday. And Monday, I get an email from them saying, we're saying yes. And so they're in the
Oh.
process of meeting the kids. And it took them
Oh.
18 months, which is not 5 years. It's not 5.
No.
That's not even a year and a half yet. So that's the work that I do on the side, is just helping more
I
families
love
do what
that.
I did. I joked with my husband really early and I wanted a very large family. He said maximum of two. I was more in like the dozen realm. So I think in some ways it's a blessing that he said no and had a boundary, because as a result, I have such passion to help more children in the foster care system that this is a wonderful way to continue
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
help people know about children, to see them, and to really kind of help reshape how we, if you will, market this opportunity and showcase children in foster care, because it doesn't always have the brightest of colors.
Oh,
And that's really what I'm setting out to do, is how do I rebrand this? Because if that was me, if it was you, Michelle, like we'd want a champion. We'd want to be
yes.
seen as kids,
Mm-hmm.
kids that made no mistake in life. We just unfortunately were in kind of a bad deck of cards.
Mm-hmm. Um, so I had to hold back tears when you said about the family that, and it's just like, it's so freaking awesome. And so for anyone listening right now, and I had the same experience, Marcy, and I shared it with you, is that when you and I first met, it was like, I am not doing enough with my life.
Oh,
And so this is, but it's energizing. Okay. It's not in this negative beat up way. It's this, there is so much more in the space of where we can help in the area that we have passion around, right? So
yeah,
my thing is not going to be channeling into adoptive parenting, right? But
yeah,
mine is going to be around, and it is around, how can we get um, democratizing coaching or whatever is called, but how can we get it to where more people have access to a mentor, a coach, a consultant, whatever that is, that where you need in the space that you're in, so that the time that you have on this earth and this body is better time. It just, you feel better. You look forward to things, you rephrase things. So for and reframe. So like you were talking about running up the hills, at the hill to die on. No, it's the summit to climb. We're doing that to ourselves. And so all of a sudden this stuff comes in our way and we're not going, really, again, is it ever going to get any better? Because that's a lot of language people use for themselves. And it's like, okay, then. So here we go. Clearly it's not the clean path that I want. So what am I missing? But so we can shift real time and not go into a victim mode and beat ourselves up and then get stuck and not move forward. Uh,
yeah.
so I thank you for that, because I'm hoping that people listening will go, oh my God, she did all that stuff out basically off the side of her desk, and the other because the passion, but
Yeah.
realize the only barrier to us doing things like that is us.
Sure. And I think just to add encouragement, if someone's
Yeah.
like, okay, that sounds so easy, but because like there is, what you don't see is all the hardship and all
Oh
like the
yeah.
times I felt crazy and the setbacks and the friendships that I sort of lost along the way because people just didn't get it. And so like it's sort of like that whole idea of like you are the sum of the seven people you hang around with. And some of those
Yes.
people that were there earlier just this isn't their thing. And that's okay. Like no hard feelings. It's just you have to kind of continue, but I will encourage listeners. I remember when I worked full time in philanthropy that I was in some class. I couldn't tell you exactly what it was, but it gave me this idea very like mid-career for me, where it was talking about like, is it more impactful? And this was like from a charitable giving perspective. Is it
Mhm.
more impactful to spread your money out among like 10, 15 agencies, maybe support the friend doing the 5K, give to the, kid at school, all the things? Or is it better if you bundle it and you go really, really deep in a few
Mhm.
things? And it was interesting because at the time, I think the topic was really around major giving, meaning gifts that were kind of significant in
Yeah.
financial value. And I remember being like, well, that's really interesting because if you do couple together the shallow giving and you go deep, what does that look like? And
Mhm.
I think that's really subconsciously been part of where I'm at, because when I left the nonprofit world and went to reskill, I left a whole skill set behind. And it was kind of
Mhm.
sad. Like part of my ego, part of my worth, part of my value,
Identity.
like I
Identity.
had to kind of lay it down. And it's interesting because one thing I did do, and I would caution people before doing this, that like this is actually kind of a scary exercise, but I took a piece of paper and I folded it in half vertically and I put a little T at the top. And on the left column, I wrote, and this was like me getting frustrated about it's pandemic. I'm seeing how some of the advertising is done in the space. And it was those famous words of, well, someone should. And I wrote down all the possible ways I could think of what could I do? What could somebody do? In my list, I mean, I filled that whole sheet of paper, Michelle. Like
Yeah.
it was lots of things. And then I sat back and thought to myself, yeah, that like I would be overwhelmed. And this might be where listeners are like, that's really overwhelming to understand. Well, these are all the things I could do.
Mhm.
So I made myself a commitment to move them over to the right side. My commitment was I may move one, two, at most three, and I may not move any more until one is done. And
Mhm.
that exercise, Michelle, gave me so much clarity because I thought, okay, I have chosen the two things that I think will bring the most value. I recognize I'm not doing everything, but I can
Mhm.
do something.
Mhm. Yeah. There was a quote, thank you for that. There was a quote that I ran across too. It's like, we can't do everything, but we can do something.
Yeah.
And I think that's important because we end up with this, we get stuck at solving world peace, boiling the ocean, whatever it is, right?
Right.
So that's language from my process improvement world. Because you end up with leaders that go into something, they go, well, all this has to be fixed. Well, yeah. And where do you start? Because
Right.
that's what you're talking about, right? And what happens to our subconscious when we do this, because what I heard you say is, I pulled something over, you can pull two or three, you can't pull any more until you get one done. Well, the one done, or even when it's not done yet, creates motivation because you're getting the wins. At some level, you're getting the wins. And eventually, and this is where you're at now, is motivation turns into traction. Right. And so you're in the traction mode. You can hear it, feel it, sense it. You're taking stuff to the next level. And I think what, to your point, what happens a lot of times people hear where you're at and they're so not even close to that that they're like, I don't even know how to get there. You just called out, hey, get there. This is where you start. Find
Yeah.
the
And a lot of it's
framework.
just the consistency. It's just like I started a podcast and I was like, just be consistent. You might sound crazy, just be consistent. Like just drop the episode every month. Drop the,
Yeah.
and it's just, it sounds so silly, right? But, and it's interesting to hear your word of traction because I think, again, I went back to that like running visual in my head that I'm like,
Yeah.
in track, when you have spikes on your shoes, like it digs in the ground.
Mhm.
And that's, I thank you for that imagery because the word that I've been using with my board and the volunteers that are working on some of these projects is the momentum. It's like we recognize that things are moving and in motion, and there's a stewardship aspect to that. That it's like, okay, it's there, and we don't want to drop it. Like it
Mhm.
needs to be cared for and thoughtfully planned for, and there's more to come.
Yeah. And you create this, I'm going to go back to the flywheel effect, right? Because that's part of it. You create this momentum to where all of a sudden you could at some point step away and it's not going to fall apart.
Right.
Because, and I don't know if you're there yet now, you may be, you may not be, you may be such a force that people are with it and doing it because you're the force still. You don't know. And one of the things I talk to leaders about is take a look around, and I can't imagine you're in this space, but I'm going to say it because I think it's important, is that we don't create the condition to where we're the linchpin.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we're the linchpin and we get pulled out for whatever reason, maybe the amazing thing happened and we go on to bigger, better things, whatever it may be, linchpin gone, things just crumble. So it's pay attention to that. Whatever thing that you're in, passion project or anything else, don't create the space to where you're the linchpin to all that stuff happening. It's going to happen in the beginning.
To call out because I think recognizing that you are needed is not a bad thing.
No.
It's just, am I kind of almost like codependent in this space? Because where you're hitting for my interjection right here is there's a bit of automation we're building. And there's like, I have now since instead of meeting with families one-on-one and kind of doing a foster care adoption 101, last year I put together a 45-minute course because it's like if you have deep questions, I will meet with you for deep questions. But on the
Mhm.
whole, like the 101, I've got that for you, got a PDF for you, like here you go.
Yeah.
And it's exciting to figure that out. But I actually have a book coming out this fall, Michelle, called It's Okay to Talk About Addiction. And I've
I
been
love.
telling my team that I'm like, to me, at least the way that I'm feeling in the current kind of vision is I think this is my final book to adults related to foster care adoption. And it's interesting because as we're looking through the table of contents and we're strategizing, so my word for 2025 is ember, and an ember being like that small little coal or thing that's sort of keeping its warmth and color, but it might be around some stuff that's cold or dark, right? And the ember is what keeps that flame going.
Mhm.
So with that as a backdrop, my team, it's been amazing. They were like, Marcy, this is your pass the torch book. And I'm
Uh,
like,
that.
how funny because and it's like, yes, that's exactly. So I'm like, I'm not special. in any way that makes me, especially the only person on the entire planet that could do this work. I just simply said yes to it. I
Mhm.
felt the same way writing my graphic novel. Like I did not do theater. I love watching musicals and things like that. But like I have never been a theater kid. But yet I felt this story on my heart. And I have for my podcast guests, I have a number of teens that either age out of the system or they themselves were adopted or they're adoptive parents. So I have stories that kind of meld together. And it's been such a really big gift, Michelle, to say, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I have the tools, I have the connections, I have the relationships to mobilize this. And I have heard your story. And what we need to do with your story is tell your story. And so if I
Yeah.
can be a conduit of that, amazing. But certainly, like, to your point, like the whole point is to help everyone be part of the solution.
Yeah. And I think, and it's to raise awareness around a topic that I didn't even know about. I didn't even know about. And so most likely what's going to happen now is like, and it does, and you and I joked around about, well, I adopted my dog. I mean, I have a relationship with adoption. It's not a human. Um, but I think it's bringing it front and center. It's like mental health issues or anything else. Let's get rid of the stigma around it. It's not an embarrassment. And it's a realization that we don't have to go outside the country to adopt kids that are in need. They're right here at home.
There's just not I mean, there's a business model, for better or for worse, behind adopting an infant, behind adopting internationally, and that's not bad or wrong.
No,
It just
no,
is. But with foster care adoption, it's a government program. We don't put flashy billboards up saying
no.
file your taxes. Like, come
Yeah,
on, people, you know. And so, fortunately, it just is. And I think that's part of kind of why the lack of awareness is there, but then there's
yeah.
also stigma. There's all sorts of pieces, but I'm like, okay, that is what it is. But there, I mean, I have seen it, Michelle. I mean, in the time of doing this work since the pandemic, I've taught over 12,000 families who these children are.
I
And
love it.
it's not that they are, you know, some of them are like, I didn't know, or I knew
Yeah.
someone teach me. Like there's all sorts of cross sections, or I was adopted, or you know, this person was special in my life.
Mhm.
But what's interesting too, one more data point for you, is that in families that have children, so basically like any school setting is kind of where you can go with this. 1 in 25 kids is adopted in our country, but
Really?
yet, yes, but yet we don't talk about it. 1 in 25. So unless you're like at a really small private school that has like 12 kids in a classroom, public school setting, my husband's a teacher, at least one kid per classroom based on the data should be adopted.
You and I were talking because you're bringing me back to something because I was when we had the intro call and then we're gonna wrap up.
Yeah.
We were talking because my grandfather was in an orphanage, right?
Yeah.
And so it wasn't foster care at the time, and he and his brother were in an orphanage. And I think you mentioned that your
My
husband's
husband's grandfather was also
grandfather
orphaned.
was
Yeah.
also, well, I have another coach I'm doing some work with, and I was talking to her about our conversation, and she goes, "My grandfather was in an orphanage." I'm like, said, wait a
Well, this
minute.
is like our action item from this interview. Like we need to
Oh,
get together and
isn't
talk.
it crazy?
It's
Oh
on
yeah,
purpose.
I think it'd
Yeah.
be cool to get us together. But I'm like,
Yeah.
Marcy literally said I haven't run across people that have that, and then boom, I've got two at my doorstep and I'm
Because
like,
we talked about it. It's like you buy
yes,
the red car and oh my gosh, everyone's got it.
yes,
So it's the
yes,
same
it's
thing.
so crazy. I
Yeah.
freaking love this time with you, and I encourage you, I invite you to come back at any time that you want for another conversation. And if you don't pick it up and say, yes, Michelle, we need to talk again soon, I will be tapping you on the shoulder. So thank you. Question for you. What 1 to 2 things would you love people to walk away with from our time together?
Yeah. Well, thank you. This has been just so fun just to talk about our hearts and what's, you know, kind of on our
Yeah,
minds and
I
going
love
through. What
it.
did you think to take away? I think number one, and this cannot be overemphasized, if it feels out of your comfort zone, do it anyway.
I love it.
Like I think right now the thing that I've been telling myself the most out loud, because I've had to like repeat a lot of things like, oh, I made this thing, it's done, and then like computer crap, whatever. And I've been saying this so much in front of my kids, it's really for me, but I'm like, I want them to learn this. Like keep saying I can do hard things. I can do hard things. I can do hard things. And you can do hard things.
Yeah. Things are hard until they're not.
Right.
Things are hard until they're not. And the other thing that comes to mind for me is that I heard someone say is, well, it'll be easier next year. No, it never gets easier. We get better at doing hard. We get better at doing hard. And so I totally agree. You're a freaking awesome human. I love spending time in the room with you. So this has
Oh,
been,
so much fun.
it's true, by the way. Okay, it's true. This has been Leadership Soundbites. Please like, share, subscribe. Until next time, I will put Marcy's contact information so you can reach out and ask some questions, get some answers. So thank you.
You're welcome.